want to be in the news, right? Get people talking about your work, your ideas, maybe even you.
Who doesn't?
Exactly. And today we are talking about See Spot Run
Okay.
by D. Nikki Wheeler,
Yes.
which is a media relations playbook. It's all about how to navigate the media.
Yeah.
And she really kind of ditches all the jargon.
It's great. Yeah.
Very
So
straightforward, very practical.
yeah, and she's hilarious. I mean, she has like decades of experience in the field, and she's worked with like everybody.
Right.
But she's so down to earth, and she explains things in a way that makes it like anybody could understand it, which I think is so important.
And I like how she opens with this anecdote about trying to explain media relations to a room full of teenagers.
Oh yeah.
Because they're just like, what?
Right. Like what is
Like, what is that? Like, do you mean influencer?
Right. Exactly.
Do you mean like YouTuber?
It's so funny. Yeah, that's like one of the biggest takeaways I got from the book is that it's not about like sending out a press release and just hoping that something happens.
Yeah.
It's about understanding like how the media works and what journalists are looking for.
Right.
So you can craft a story that they're going to actually be interested in.
Right. It's strategy.
Yes.
It's like we need a strategy meeting to like figure out how we're going to even approach this.
Exactly.
And one of the first things she says is like, you have to understand what they consider newsworthy.
Yes.
And she uses this really interesting example of the Kim Kardashian robbery in Paris.
Right.
Now, you would think on the surface, like, okay, it's celebrity crime, like it's not really like that groundbreaking.
Right.
But then she breaks it down. She's like, is it new? Well, not really unusual.
Right.
Well, I mean, she did have a securities detail, so kind of unusual.
Kind of. Yeah, that's true.
Is it significant?
Yeah, that's the thing. It is significant.
Is it like
Right.
Yeah.
Because you've got a high-profile celebrity.
Yeah.
You've got all this jewelry, and it just like lends itself to all these conspiracy theories. So it becomes this big international incident.
right? It's not just like, oh, she got her purse stolen.
Exactly.
This is major.
Right. Exactly.
So even if your client isn't, hanging out with the Kardashians,
Right.
you still have to kind of think about those same criteria,
Exactly.
which that brings us to the age-old question, should we write a press release for this?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Every company event,
Yeah.
every new hire.
Right, I know. Every little thing.
It's major news, right? We should tell the world.
Right, exactly.
But Wheeler has some thoughts.
She does. She uses this great analogy of like a media relations iceberg.
Okay.
So above the waterline, you see that final story,
Right.
the one that gets published.
Right.
But what people don't see is everything below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So all the like prep work, all the relationship building.
Oh, interesting.
The strategic pitching that goes into it, sometimes it takes, months,
Yeah.
years.
Right. It's not like an overnight thing. You don't
Yeah.
just like send it out and then boom, suddenly you're like the
Yeah.
front page.
Yeah, it's not a magic bullet, unfortunately.
So a press release is just one tool in the arsenal.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not about making that big splash,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more about like building that credibility
Okay.
more quietly. Like she talks about this one tech client who was like raring to send out a press release about a new sale that they made, which, I mean,
That seems pretty standard.
it does, right. But she dug a little deeper and she was like, I think a business advisory would be a smarter move.
Okay. Now what is that?
So it's kind of like a press release's like less flashy cousin.
Okay.
It still gets picked up by like all the news databases and industry publications, but it doesn't require this big media blitz.
Oh, I see. So you still get your name out there.
Exactly.
You get that street cred, but you're not being like obnoxious about it.
Right, exactly. And I thought this was really smart too. They actually decided to do like a joint byline with the customer.
Oh.
So it ended up boosting both of their profiles.
Oh, very smart.
Right. And then instead of just like this really dry announcement, they actually put together like this really simple iPhone video
Oh.
of a tour of their data center,
Interesting.
which, added that visual element and helped tell a more compelling story.
It's about storytelling.
Exactly.
Which is so funny because when you think of media relations, you don't necessarily think of yourself as a storyteller, but you kind of are.
You are, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
That's why you need a pro, because you're like, oh, I can put out a press release, but it's like, but can you tell a story
Right.
that's going to make people want to read it more than the next press release they get in their inbox, because they get how many a day?
Hundreds, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it kind of reminds me, there's another point where she talks about asking the opposite of the obvious question.
Good.
So instead of just saying, how do we announce this?
Right.
Ask, what's the bigger story here?
Yeah.
Is there a bigger story? Or is this just us tooting our own horn, which nobody cares about?
Right, exactly. What's the narrative that's going to resonate?
Yeah.
Because they see so many stories all the time.
Right.
They know what's going to work and what's not.
Right.
So you've got to figure out what is that story that's going to actually grab their attention.
And that you have to do research.
Yes.
You can't just be like, oh, well, I think this is interesting or I think this is important.
Right.
You have to kind of become like a media detective.
Right. You do.
What are the key influencers talking about?
Exactly. Like she uses this great example from when Star Wars,
Yeah.
The Force Awakens came out.
Okay.
And, the online ticket sales were so big that they crashed the internet.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I remember that. That
Yeah.
was like a whole thing, and
Right.
everyone was making fun of it.
Right.
And it was just
It was a big deal.
a thing. But her client at the time was a tech company,
Right.
not a movie studio.
Right.
But the underlying story wasn't about Star Wars. It was about network scalability,
Exactly.
which her client specialized in.
Exactly. And she was ready. She had like this whole pitch bank ready to go
Smart.
around like network scalability and all that. So when that happened, she was like, okay.
That's brilliant. So it's like she swooped in and stole the second paragraph.
Exactly. Like the headline is Star Wars.
Right.
But then it's like, but why did this happen?
Yeah.
And what can we do to prevent it from happening again? And that's where she comes in.
Exactly. That's really smart. I like that. Okay. And then sometimes you need to know when to like advise caution.
Yes.
Even if you have a client that's like go, go, go.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And she talks about this cautionary tale involving a gaming company that was
Right.
very gung-ho about putting out a press release announcing a new board member.
Okay. Which on the surface doesn't sound that.
It doesn't sound that controversial.
Right.
Just like, oh, whatever, we got a new board member.
Right.
But this is where like understanding the legalities of things comes in,
Right.
which is not something that everybody thinks about.
Exactly. And you don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to get in any legal trouble.
No.
Especially when you think it's something as simple as like a board member announcement.
Right. Like what could go wrong there?
Well, the press release mentioned some trademarks
Oh.
and other intellectual property.
Okay.
And they didn't do it in a way that was like legally sound.
Oh, no.
So she advised them to hold back, but they decided to just go for it.
Oh, no.
And, well, let's just say that there were some awkward apologies issued later.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, you really have to know the ins and outs of the legal side of things, which a lot of people don't realize.
Right, because I'm not a lawyer. I don't know this stuff.
Right.
Exactly.
That's why we need experts, like,
And you know another thing that's changed so much?
is how people think about trade shows.
Oh, yeah.
There used to be these big things where all the reporters would be just like waiting to get the scoop.
Right, notebooks out, chasing people down.
Exactly. But it's not really like that anymore.
So what do you do? Because it feels like trade shows are still important.
Oh, they are. They're still incredibly valuable because it's where the entire industry gathers.
Right.
But you have to approach them differently. Wheeler talks about this concept of the backpack reporter.
Okay, now what is that? Like, I'm picturing someone with a literal backpack full of cameras and microphones.
Well, it's more of a mindset shift than anything.
Okay.
It's about you becoming the reporter.
Oh, interesting.
You can use your phone to record a quick video, interview a client, or even just capture the energy of the event.
Right. So instead of waiting for a reporter to find you, you're bringing the news to them.
Exactly. You can say, hey, I know you couldn't make it to the show this year, but I thought you'd find this interesting.
It's so much more proactive.
It is. And it plays right into those core goals we were talking about earlier. Building brand awareness, generating leads, nurturing relationships, all without sending a single press release.
Speaking of press releases,
Yeah.
how do you even measure whether all this effort is working? It's not like you can just count how many articles mention your client.
Right. It's got to be more than just vanity metrics.
So what does Wheeler suggest?
She's all about proving real impact.
Okay, how do you do that?
It starts with understanding what success actually looks like for your client.
Oh.
Are they trying to reach investors, potential customers, policymakers?
Right, they're all different audiences.
Exactly. And each one requires a slightly different approach.
So you have to tailor your strategy to the specific audience.
Exactly. And instead of just counting articles, she's talking about analyzing their reach and influence.
Okay, so like, where were they published? Who read them? What was the overall tone?
All that.
Yeah.
And most
Hmm.
importantly, did it actually lead to any tangible actions?
Did it move the needle?
Exactly. She even has this whole scoring system. like a 0 to 100 for each piece of coverage.
Whoa, that's intense.
It is, right? But it's about being able to go back to your client and say, look, these 3 articles, they were published in top-tier outlets that reach your exact target audience, and they generated X number of leads.
That's music to their ears.
Right. Because it shows that you're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks.
And speaking of things sticking, we've talked a lot about alternatives to press releases, but it sounds like Wheeler still thinks they have a place.
Oh, she does. But it has to be strategic.
So when is a press release actually the right tool?
It needs to be big news, a merger, a new product launch, a major company milestone.
Okay, so not just, we had a good quarter.
Right. More like we just revolutionized the industry, something that's actually newsworthy.
So if it's not big news, maybe you hold back on the press release.
Exactly. But when it is the right tool for the job, she's a big fan of what she calls the smart release.
Okay, so tell me about this smart release. What makes it so special?
Well, it's designed for how people consume information online.
Okay.
It's shorter, punchier, gets straight to the point. It's not bogged down with jargon or unnecessary details.
So it's like the Twitter version of a press release.
Exactly. It's social media friendly, and it embraces the online world
How so?
by incorporating hyperlinks, visuals, multimedia elements. It's not just a wall of text.
So it's more engaging for the reader.
Yes, and it takes into account all those Google algorithm updates that we hear so much about.
Oh, right, like Panda and Penguin and all those.
Exactly. Those updates were all about rewarding high-quality content
Right.
and punishing spammy tactics.
So you have to play the game.
You do. And the smart release is designed to do just that. It's optimized for both human readers and search engines.
So it's the best of both worlds.
Exactly. Wheeler even includes a sample smart release in the book, breaking down each element and why it works.
Okay, give me the highlights.
Okay, so you get your attention-grabbing headline, which is optimized for social sharing. Then your concise introductory paragraph that summarizes the key news.
Keep it short and sweet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then bullet points for the most important information.
Easy to digest.
And, of course, clear calls to action so readers know what to do next.
Gotcha. So what am I supposed to do with this information?
Exactly. And don't forget about supporting assets.
Like what?
Links to white papers, videos, infographics.
Oh, interesting.
You're creating a whole content ecosystem around your news.
Oh, I see.
So even if a reporter only spends 60 seconds on the press release itself, they're clicking on your links, downloading your resources, and learning more about your client.
So you've got them hooked.
Exactly. And because smart releases are trackable, you can see what's resonating.
Okay.
Who's clicking, who's downloading, who's sharing.
Powerful.
It is. You get valuable data that can inform your future media relations efforts.
It takes all the guesswork out of it.
Right. And that takes us to part 3 of C-Spot Run, where Wheeler really focuses on taking action and getting results.
Yeah.
It's all about taking action. Enough with the planning. Let's go.
Let's do it. Right.
Let's run with it.
Okay.
And she opens with, I think, a really fascinating case study
Okay.
about this telecom company that was struggling with a pretty, well, let's just say they didn't have a very good reputation.
Right. Telecom companies, they're not really known for their, like, stellar customer service, right?
Not really.
It's like you know what you're getting into when you call them.
Exactly. But instead of shying away from the problem,
Right.
they decided to actually lean into it.
Okay.
They were like, you know what? We're going to own this.
Bold move.
It was.
Mm.
And they started by actually listening to their customers, like really listening.
Interesting. So, like, what were they saying?
They were getting all the usual suspects, inaccurate bills, those endless hold times, feeling like you're talking to a robot instead of a real person.
Right. All the classics.
Right. And they actually went through and systematically started addressing each of these issues, but then they had like this major light bulb moment.
Okay.
They realized that a lot of their customers, especially like the younger generation, they actually prefer digital self-service
Oh, interesting.
if it's done right.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? How do you, like, revamp your customer service for the digital age?
Well, so this is where the media relations part comes in. Did this. This company, they weren't even on social media.
Wait, what? A telecom company, not on social media?
I know, right?
I mean, how is that even possible?
It was like they were living under a rock. And Wheeler really laid down the law. She was like, this is not a fad. This is the future of how you're going to be engaging with your customers.
Oh, I bet they felt a little, maybe a little behind the times.
Just a little. But they took the plunge.
Okay.
And they ended up launching this like first of its kind social media platform that was dedicated specifically to customer service.
Wow, so they just went all in.
They did. It was this way for them to, like, directly engage with their customers, like, in real time.
Yeah.
And, address concerns, be more transparent.
Which is huge.
It was. And it worked. Suddenly, their customers had this dedicated channel. So instead of just, like, ranting on Twitter, they could actually get their questions answered.
Oh, I see. So it actually gave them an outlet that was productive
Exactly.
for both sides.
Yes. And, really changed the whole conversation.
That's a great example. So it's not just about, like, reacting to things, though, right?
Right.
She also talks about, like, establishing yourself as a thought leader.
Yes, you want to be the expert.
The go-to person.
Right.
But that doesn't just happen overnight.
It doesn't. You need a plan.
So where do you even begin?
She actually breaks down this whole process of, like, developing a thought leadership platform. And it starts with building the right team.
Okay, so we're not just talking about the CEO here. We're talking about, like, the people behind the scenes.
Yeah. Writers, content people, social media gurus.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Got it. So you've got your dream team. What's next?
Then it's all about your goals. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve? Are you raising awareness about an issue? Are you trying to position your client as, like, this amazing innovator? Once you know what you want, you can start figuring out those topics where your client really shines.
It's about playing to your strengths.
Exactly. And figuring out who you're actually trying to reach.
Right, because that's important too.
It is. Are you going for, like, academic journals, or are you going for more mainstream media?
So different strokes for different folks.
Right, exactly. And this is another area where she brings up another one of her acronyms. This one is ROSCE.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here with the acronyms. Break this one down for me.
So ROSCE stands for responsible, accountable, supporting, consulted, and informed.
Okay, so this is basically like a way to keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah. So for every single piece of content, you figure out who's responsible for creating it, who's accountable if it, like, totally bombs.
Okay, so everybody knows what they're doing, and there's no question about who dropped the ball if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
I like it.
So it's all about that, like, teamwork, making sure everybody's on the same page.
Speaking of teamwork, she also talks about media training, especially for executives.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, they're brilliant, but they don't necessarily know how to talk to the media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she tells this great story about this one CEO, and, he's convinced that he doesn't need media training. He's like, I got this.
Oh, no. This is going to be good.
I know, right? And then, of course, he goes into this interview totally unprepared.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a disaster. He got flustered. He started rambling. He's contradicting himself.
It's like the importance of, like, just taking a beat
Right.
and being like, even if you think you've got it, maybe just like a little refresher never hurts.
Exactly. It's all about, like, thinking on your feet, staying calm.
Staying on message.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of staying on message, she talks about message maps.
Yes. Message maps. They are amazing.
Okay, tell me more. How do they work?
It's basically like a cheat sheet.
Okay.
It makes sure you hit those key points no matter where the conversation goes.
Oh, that's really smart. So how does that actually work?
It's basically like a visual representation of your messages. You've got your main point, your supporting points, and then your bridging statements.
Bridging statements. What are those?
Okay, so let's say a reporter asks you a question that you just really don't want to answer.
Right. Happens all the time.
Right. So you could use a bridging statement. You could say something like, that's an interesting question, but I think what's really important to focus on here is, and then you pivot to one of your key messages.
It's so smooth. Like nobody even knows that you just completely avoided their question.
Exactly.
Okay. And then the last thing she talks about is crisis communications.
Yes. The elephant in the room.
Right. Because no matter how much you prepare,
Things happen.
things go wrong.
Things can go wrong.
And she actually says that that's her favorite part of media relations.
Yes.
Crisis communications.
Yeah. It's high stakes. You got to act fast.
Right. You got to think on your feet. And she has this crazy story.
Yes.
Okay, tell me.
Okay. So this client was accused of murder.
Of murder?
Of murder by the coroner.
Oh my God.
For harvesting organs, it's a whole thing.
Okay, that escalated quickly.
Right. And it just shows how quickly things can get out of control.
So what did they do?
Well, the second that they heard about this accusation, they went into crisis mode.
Okay.
They had this, like, pre-approved statement
Smart.
that basically bought them some time to get the facts straight.
So it's better to say no comment
Exactly.
than to say something you regret later.
Exactly. And in this case, they really needed it because
Mm.
the accusation was so serious, they needed to get out in front of this before it became this big, huge thing.
Oh, absolutely. So what do they do?
They held a press conference. They brought in the CEO, and he was very calm. He refuted the accusations. He laid out the facts. Then they brought in actual medical experts.
Okay, to like back up their claims.
Yes, to debunk everything that the coroner was saying. And guess what? Turns out the coroner wasn't even a real doctor.
Oh my God, are you serious?
Fine.
So they totally turned around.
They did.
Wow,
They exposed him as a total fraud.
that's amazing.
It's a great example of just being prepared. Knowing your stuff and knowing how to leverage the media.
So, key takeaway from C-Spot Run.
I think the biggest thing is that media relations, it's not this big mystery. Anybody can learn it. And, she really breaks it down so that it's easy to understand.
Yeah, I agree. And whether you're like just starting out or you've been doing this for years, there's always something new to learn.
Always.
Well, on that note, that is C-Spot Run by Nikki Wheeler. I hope you found this deep dive insightful and maybe even a little inspiring. What opportunities will you be looking for?